Well, hi everyone. I'm Daniel Williams, Senior Editor at MGMA and host of the MGMA Podcast Network. We are back with another MGMA Insights Podcast, and we have a return guest, Steve Brewer. Now, Steve is a seasoned healthcare leader, and he has penned another article for MGMA. It's titled, "Can Focusing on Burnout Cause More Burnout?" And by the time you're listening to this, we believe that article will be on mgma.com, and so we'll provide a direct link as soon as we can to that article. So, Steve, we've had you on the show before. You and I have talked. We've met at leaders' conferences and enjoyed each other's company there. But just for the sake of our listeners who may not know who you are, just bring us up to speed, where you are currently. Tell us anything you want to share about your practice, anything else like that.
Daniel, thank you for inviting me back on. I really appreciate it. And I'm glad that and hope that the article really resonates with a lot of folks. So thanks for that. By way of background and reminder, I am Steve Brewer. I'm the Chief Operating Officer with GI Associates, independent gastroenterology practice group in Wausau, Wisconsin. So if anybody's looking at my video background, that's not the view from my office right now.
Well, yeah, you and I were talking about that offline because I knew you were in Wisconsin the last time I talked to you, and I went, wow, did Steve move to the Bay Area?
No, I'll have to get some pictures of like lakes or maybe Granite Peak ski area. That'll be a little bit more representative of our wonderful community here in Wausau, Wisconsin.
All right. Well, it's always great to catch up with you, and looking forward to seeing you at a live face-to-face event with MGMA, not where we're talking via technology, but we can just sit down and have a good chat. So let's start with this topic. So can thinking of burnout cause more burnout? Where did you get the original idea to research this topic?
So it probably occurred to me a number of years ago. And part of it was, as Daniel, you and I have talked, I've been on my own kind of journey for, I've been in burnout and have felt burnout. Personally, I've watched it with our clinicians and our leaders, et cetera. So it's been kind of a personal journey for me. And the idea kind of struck me one time. I was in some meetings and we spent most of the time, kind of complaining about, dynamics that we were frustrated with. We were talking about how it was really compounding frustration and burnout. And we didn't really do any kind of, proactive problem solving or anything like that. And then as I kind of got more in tune with that, I started to notice that as being kind of the norm instead of the exception, as that folks really just kind of were ruminating and complaining about frustrations. And then as I talked to early careerists and even early careerists, leaders, managers, physicians, nurses, even some family members, that they're really not that far into their career and they're already feeling burnout. And I feel, I think one level that's kind of sad and tragic because, they've gone to school, they have this passion for helping people, and already they're a bit disillusioned. But I also notice a trend that's the common theme, the common conversation is, how are we frustrated? How burned out are we? And as I've gone through my learnings and my studies, I came across the concept of this repetitive negative thinking, and where our minds focus and how our minds can kind of adapt to what we experience and think about, that we almost set ourselves up for failure, that's what we focus on, maybe consciously as well as subconsciously. And that kind of brought forth, I'm like, how do I title this? But it's just simply, can focusing on this actually be making it worse? And so that's some of the background and the experience that brought me to this article.
Yeah, I wanted to ask you a question then. I've brought this up on the MGMA podcast before. Previously, I covered the financial services industry. So if we've got 401ks, if we've got investments, we might be a little bit nervous right now. But one of the things, there's an economic study, it really looks at the way our brains work, and we look at the power of losses, that we are affected more deeply by loss than we are by gain. And it really speaks to, that's bells are ringing in my ears right now, hearing what you're talking about. When we get into that repetitive negative thinking, it can really drag us down there. I don't want to put you on the spot because it's not a question I had planned to ask you, but when you said that, I wanted to ask you, what has your research told you about that repetitive negative thinking and how that can really impact us as human beings?
Well, so even on the dynamic of, we have our portfolios and all of a sudden, it's less today than it was yesterday. As we get into the kind of the natural human condition where our brains are pre-wired to be kind of on the lookout for something's going to go wrong. We're predisposed or a negative bias, a negativity bias. And when we experience those things, it's been proven that our reactions are quicker to react or be negative. They last longer, and it really kind of invades our mindset some. So when you look at those in that economic example, that's hand in glove with the science around psychology and neuroplasticity and that sort of thing. So that is, a non-healthcare related example, but it's true across, different fields. And it's just really, I kind of call it that human condition. So repetitive negative thinking is really kind of the same thing where it's almost kind of the odds are stacked against us a little bit because our minds are kind of pre-wired to always look out for the next, stock is going to fall, for example. And then it happens. They're like, see, I told you so. And then when it doesn't happen, it's like, yeah, but it's not going to last. So we have this kind of almost natural tendency to have these repetitive negative thinkings of something went wrong in the past, or I'm going to be anticipated in the future, and we just kind of get stuck. And you almost have to consciously really pull yourself out of that spiral.
So let's discuss that in more detail then. So there is bringing awareness to a situation, like we're understaffed. And so myself, my team, we're overworking, we're overburdened, we're spending all this pajama time going over administrative tasks, we're burning ourselves out. So there's awareness to what's happening. And then there's repetitive negative thinking. So bring us up to speed how do we sort of bring those together in a way where it can be a net positive for us so we know these things are going on and we can do something about it versus there's a dark cloud over our heads and the sky's falling?
Yeah, that's a really nice way, I think, Daniel, to cue that up. And I'll weave in a little bit of personal experience as it relates to also some of the learnings that I picked up on. So as we look at, things aren't going well, things, we got pajama time, we have all these other kind of things that are happening. Nothing should be interpreted as, we just don't think about that, it'll go away. I think the contrast is true by actually acknowledging it in a proactive way. And there's different, I'll take some learnings out of leadership models. So there's transformational leadership or adaptive leadership. One of the core tenets of those two models is you start with you're not afraid to face reality. So if we have too much pajama time, we have, things that aren't working well, one of the things is just to pause and acknowledge it. Sometimes we get caught up in, we're just so frustrated, we don't want to talk about it anymore. We start to feel kind of spiraled or hopeless about it, and we just kind of give up. Well, this is actually a way of acknowledging that and then pausing, truly even, rebreathing, recentering, and then kind of like, okay, here's where we're at. What are we going to proactively do about it in a way that is personally fits with what our goals and values are, but also giving each other permission to kind of talk about that in a proactive way and kind of stop that negative cycle and then start to build more positive. And that becomes the focus of the conversation, because we always are going to have some challenges or things or obstacles that we have to overcome. It's how we adapt to those and proactively manage them with a more positive mindset that really makes a difference.
Let's look at the brain then. What is going on in the brain when we are subject to sustained stress levels, when they're at a high level and it just doesn't subside? What are we talking about in the human brain?
Yeah, so I think most folks are familiar with the concept of the mind-body connection, and then when we experience chronic stress, it's not good for us physically. Heart disease diabetes, obesity, other kind of things that come from dealing with or trying to manage chronic stress. But in addition to, as I mentioned, kind of the odds stacked against us a little bit, our brains become, it's called, the term is neuroplastic or neuroplasticity, is that the neuron connections, the receptors in the different synapses, they actually get stronger and more of them develop depending on what our brains are processing at the time. So we are in chronic stress mode, crisis mode, distress mode. Those parts of the brain that are known for having those feelings become stronger. The neurotransmitters that, like norepinephrine, are quicker to release, that amplifies that. And again, so you think of it like we've had more stronger hardwiring, as well as the grease that makes that run actually gets more pronounced in our brains, and it just continues to make it quicker to react, quicker to go right to that negative part. And it actually can shrink what's called the prefrontal cortex, where that part doesn't get activated as much, and it actually starts to, kind of like muscles, it starts to shrink or atrophy a little bit.
Okay.
And the good news is that you can reverse some of that.
Okay. Let's talk about how we do that. So one of the things that was really interesting in the article, I have a early copy of that. You write about something, I want to get this right, called depressive rumination, and how focusing on being burned out can deepen those feelings for some people. Let's talk about the warning signs that someone might be caught in this sort of a mental loop of depressive rumination.
Yeah, so I came across that term in the psychology literature as it speaks to, traditional psychology works on trying to help people who are in that kind of distressed or crisis mode, and how do we cope with that? And one of the concepts is this depressive rumination, where I almost think of it as you wake up in the morning and then you're like, oh yeah, well, I'm awake. Here's the morning. Oh, that's right, I'm depressed. Today's going to go bad. It's not going to work out well. Our thinking kind of gets more narrow. And then sure enough, the way we behave, something's going to happen. See, I told you it's not going to work out. And they just kind of have this self-fulfilling prophecy. Same thing with burnout. I can see folks, metaphorically kind of waking up and going, yep, it's a good night's sleep, perhaps. But, oh, that's right, I'm burned out. I'm going to have a bad day. And that is then they kind of build this cycle that develops. And I think of it a little bit like if you've ever been in the market for a new car and you go, hey, I'm going to go buy a new car. And all of a sudden you start seeing that same model that you're looking at everywhere you go.
Right.
You've just become more attuned to that. And that's kind of maybe a goofy example of that. But I think that's kind of how we attend to what we think about.
Yeah. The car one is a great example, because I bought a car a few years ago, and I'm not sure, I maybe saw this model of car once every couple of months. And then just like what you said, then I'd see one 4 times a day, and it's like, good gracious, what did everybody get the idea? Did we all read the same article? But it's something going on in the brain then? What else can you tell us about that?
Yes, I think that's because we become more attuned to that one. So our synapses are more like, oh, there's the model, there's a color, whatever I'm looking at. And then same thing on more of these concepts. So if you are a kind of either personality trait wise, or you've had this chronic negativity develop, and your brain is quicker to activate those parts of your brain, and the connections and synapses go along with that, something else happens negative, and then boom, you're right back there. And that just happens to, you're more aware, and that sort of thing. You're actually the contrary. Sadly, you're less aware of the positivities. And so it's the same kind of concept, but with how we internalize and process experiences.
You highlight something you call the Broaden and Build Theory of positive emotions. I don't know if it's in the same universe. I was thinking of something like, well, just fake it till you make it, just like build some strength here in looking for the positive, but talk about broaden and build. What is this? What's going on here? And how do we develop this? How do we put this into practice in our own lives?
Yeah, this model, again, comes out of the positive psychology literature and the studies. And so Barbara Fredrickson's a well-known psychologist in the field, and developed this broaden and build theory or model in the late 90s. And almost opposite of the effects of repetitive negative thinking. It takes similar mechanisms, but it's actually then in the reverse. So the basic tenet of broaden and build is one is with positive emotions is that, I'm going to kind of go back to pausing, reflecting, and being self-aware, and just acknowledging like, well, I'm really kind of stuck in this rut of negativity or this cloud, but it's really giving yourself permission to take a step back and reframe. There's a lot of reframing in these models of what's real, what's more realistic in my situation, my environment, et cetera. And then actually, when we pause and we don't get so stressed out, and we have more positive experiences, some of the researchers show that literally our vision broadens, our awareness of our surroundings broadens, our open-mindedness to new ideas and concepts builds or broadens. And it starts this kind of catalyst of, actually things maybe aren't quite so bad. And then, you know what, maybe if I approach this from this way, and I start to get positive, outcomes from that. And then I start to actually, frankly, be more open to relationships and things like that. And people like, hey, Daniel's a nice guy, and I'm going to reach out and maybe give him some help or some thoughts. And you start to broaden and build both emotional resources, but also social networks, and then also physical resources. We need a certain amount of income and other things to kind of build on that. And this just kind of starts this. It's almost like, think of it as we do positive networking. One person networks with another. You build this kind of network of colleagues or connections. It's the same kind of thing, but on a much bigger scale. But the basic tenet of this is actually, if you find yourself kind of in that either natural tendency or that experience of having chronic, negative thoughts, I'm burned out, I'm frustrated, nothing's ever going to get better, is to actually pause and allow yourself to experience some joy and go, you know what, that actually was pretty nice. And these aren't a one and done kind of exercises. It's almost like any other exercise or fitness routine. It has to become things that you build on and practice. But you could be amazed at how far taking that new approach to things and kind of, I don't want to say shunning, but getting away from always going towards a negative. Mm-hmm. And you'll be surprised at how much that can change perspective. Yeah. And then that actually starts to create physical changes in both yourself, but also your environment.
Yeah. And hearing you talk about this, it reminded me of something that happened over the weekend. I was in line like we are when we go through the drive-through at Starbucks, and we got up there, we'd placed our order, and we were handing over, well, actually we have the app, so we were going to scan it. And then they said, the person in front of you paid for it. And we went, oh my gosh, that was so incredible. We want to pay for the people behind us. And then the attendant there said, you don't want to do that. I think maybe it was a soccer team or something. I don't know what it was, but they said, but thank you. It's a nice gesture. But the reason I bring that up is it's that idea of someone does something really nice to us and we want to pay that forward or pass it along. What's going on? Is this talking in some of your research? Have you come across this where when we find somebody really doing a nice thing for us, then we want to respond in kind and share that sort of kindness to other people as well?
Yeah, that has a kind of a dual effect. So that's actually one of the things they talk about, these positive psychology interventions. So one of them is we feel good about ourselves and feel positivity when we have a sense of altruism we're giving to others. So one of those is like, hey, I want to pay for the car behind me. And so I've now done a good deed and that maybe brightens my day, but I've also now brightened the person behind me day. And that prompted you to go, well, maybe I can kind of build this chain of positivity, if you will. And so there's that dynamic that is out there. And so I think that's actually both for the individual as well as those on the receiving end. And then that's just a way to kind of a foundational way to kind of build on these kind of things. So exactly, it's a great example.
Yeah. One of the other things you bring up in your article is talking about wellness programs at work. And so how does the team, the leadership, strike a balance where they can develop some guardrails or some positive programs within the organization, but not do what we were talking about at first, like reminding everybody, gosh, everybody's so burned out, So how do we strike that balance? What's the tone to get people on board, but not kind of reminding everybody how stressed out we are?
Right. So a couple of thoughts on that. One is, from a leadership perspective, one of the things I would strongly advocate for is when we make a work environment, or whether that be a single meeting, a team meeting, or just how we approach things, when we can approach things from a more relaxed perspective, more supportive, we get others around us to relax and actually enjoy some of their day. They become more creative, problem solvers, et cetera, versus that kind of hard driving kind of component to that. So when we look at kind of getting away from burnout, you notice in that example, I never mentioned the word burnout. And we're actually starting to just create a more positive work environment without going, well, I know everybody's stressed or burned out, so we're going to do a gratitude exercise. So everybody has to name one good thing that went well today. And then now we'll feel better after that. That's actually similar, but not exact quotes in some meetings. And I'm like, that's not going to really turn the corner if we're like, hurry up, get past your burnout and think of something positive. Now let's get on to the regular business. So there's, I'll call structural things that we need to think about and give people the tools, the environment to be successful. But also as we do wellness things, and I know this is kind of a balancing conversation I need to have, because I wholeheartedly believe in a lot of those programs, self-fulfillment, wellness, well-being, et cetera, obviously. None of it's always couched. We got to combat burnout, so we're going to put up a yoga class. We got to combat burnout, so we're going to do a healthy eatings class. It's like, well, you know what? We want people to be healthier. We want people to have better wellness. So we have these classes. And that burnout thing will kind of start to take care of itself without always calling attention to it. And really, is that the only reason we're doing it? Is just because people are afraid? Aren't we doing it anyway because it's the right thing to do?
Mm-hmm.
So there's my dissertation on that.
Final thought then. You cite an MGMA stat poll where fewer than half of healthcare leaders have taken steps to support their own resiliency. If we take a step back and think of that in the bigger picture, sometimes people who are caregivers and others will spend so much time helping others, but they're not helping themselves. What can we do? Any of our listeners right now or who are healthcare leaders, what can they do to take steps to make sure, even though they're helping their teams, they're helping family members, they're helping others, but sometimes they neglect themselves. So what can they do to make sure they're taking care of themselves as well?
Yeah, I think it's a dynamic that's, I can't say for sure if it's stronger or more prevalent in healthcare, but we go into healthcare to take care of others. And healthcare workers are somewhat notorious for not taking good care of themselves. They're almost too selfless in that respect. And I think leaders are that way to an extent too. So part of that is like, I have to be that stoic leader. I have to be there for my teams. I have these kind of things. And I think the tide's shifting some. If you do some Google searches or research on it, I'm starting to see more about the importance of healthcare leaders or leaders in general need to take care of themselves so they can actually be there for their families and their teams and others. So it's kind of reframing. You mentioned reframing early on. It's reframing what's the importance for me to take care of myself if I can't do it for myself. Sometimes doing it for others is enough of a change or reframe. They're like, you know what? I do need to get better sleep at night. I need you to make better lifestyle choices. It's okay to even talk about. That's also another thing as leaders, similar to like physicians and some other, healthcare workers. Well, we're uncomfortable even talking about it and acknowledging it. But as I have conversations like this, I hear more and more people saying, well, nobody's coming to ask me how I'm doing as a manager or director or vice president or whatever that leadership role might be. And I kind of, flippantly say, leaders are people too, and we need that sort of thing as well. So I think that, and then it's really giving ourselves permission to take a step back and not necessarily even listen to some of the literature, because, early on is like, well, as a leader, your job, your number one job is to help mitigate the burnout for your people, for your physicians, your nurses, your worker. But then all that did is really kind of add weight to like my shoulders as a leader. I'm like, well, here, I'm not a good leader if I'm not mitigating their burnout. And now the focus is there with more pressure, ironically, instead of like, well, I need to role model that and do that myself. And then that'll start to build that positive, broaden and build concept they talked about.
All right. Well, Steve Brewer, as always, thanks for joining us on the MGMA podcast.
You're very welcome, and thank you so much, Daniel.
Yeah, we've been talking with Steve Brewer. He's got an article coming out, Can Focusing on Burnout Cause More Burnout? That's going to be available on mgma.com. We will include that in the episode show notes when it's available. Until then, hope all of y'all are taking care of yourselves out there, and thank you so much for being MGMA podcast listeners.